Merci beaucoup, Cedric. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you for your attendance here. Thank you for this invitation. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And I want to And for those of you who might be watching elsewhere, I want to acknowledge why I acknowledge. This land acknowledgement honors First Nations as the first stewards of this land. It recognizes the painful history during which First Nations were displaced from their territories. And it also points to the possibility of reconciliation, the opportunity for renewal that comes from acknowledging and confronting our past. I want to thank all the elders, the drum, and the leaders gathered here today, and those who will gather over the next 2 days. And I want to extend a special thanks to National Chief Woodhouse Nipanak for her invitation and her leadership. I also want to thank the AFN regional chiefs and the entire team at the Assembly of First Nations for bringing us together today, bringing us together this week, and including me in this gathering. Merci à toutes les personnes présentes dans cette salle pour les discussions, les conseils et le travail que nous accomplissons ensemble. At the outset, I want to make clear that Canada's new government is committed to working directly with you to build stronger nation-to-nation relationships. For it's only by working together that we can build stronger, more prosperous First Nations communities and a stronger, more resilient Canada. In a more dangerous and divided world, Canada is choosing to build, from major national projects to local infrastructure, including in housing and water. And above all, we are choosing to build brighter futures for all our people across this great land. This mission of building is a positive endeavor. The question is not what we're against, but what we're for, what we want to build together. Because this approach must be informed by and can only move forward with First Nations. Il s'agit d'une approche qui nous unit autour d'une mission commune visant à créer des opportunités et à favoriser la prospérité partout au Canada. Now, it's not just what we build, it's how we build. We build Canadian. We build sustainably. And crucially, we will build in partnership by upholding Indigenous rights and building in ways that First Nations communities have greater security and greater prosperity. Le nouveau gouvernement du Canada sera un partenaire indéfectible, et ce, en respectant notre détermination, en reconnaissant que le partenariat commence par une compréhension commune et en faisant de l'équité et de la participation des Autochtones une priorité au moment de bâtir notre pays. First Nations leadership, prosperity, and opportunity must be foundational. And laying this foundation begins with engagement. And that's why this summer I held 3 summits to engage First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leadership about your priorities, about their priorities, to discuss opportunities for communities, for equity ownership, for resource management of major projects. Over 430 First Nations were represented at the first summit in Gatineau. Lors de ce sommet, j'ai clairement entendu que ce partenariat devait inclure le respect de l'autodétermination et un engagement continu envers la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones, ainsi que le consentement libre, préalable et éclairé. J'ai aussi entendu que vous avez beaucoup d'idées et d'ambitions, et ensemble, ayons l'audace et l'ambition de les réaliser. C'est ainsi que nous irons de l'avant ensemble. Cet été, j'ai aussi entendu plusieurs bonnes idées pour des grands projets et des petits projets. Now, nation building carries more than one meaning. Yes, projects that build our national economy and, through Indigenous equity and management, that help build First Nations. And this is not an aspiration. This is not an idea. It is the law. Specifically, under the Build Canada Act, for a project to be in Canada's national interest, it must strengthen our country's autonomy, resilience, and security. It must contribute to clean growth and align with our climate change objectives. And it must, by law, advance the interests of Indigenous peoples. Thank you. So to move from legislation to action, we launched the Major Projects Office to coordinate the development and financing of potential nation-building projects. That office has held several regional engagements with rights holders to encourage meaningful partnership and involvement of First Nations. And to ensure that Indigenous participation is embedded throughout this process, we have created the Indigenous Advisory Council. But let me be absolutely clear. None of this engagement counts as consultation. That process of consultation only starts once projects are referred as possibilities to the Major Projects Office. Under the legislation, there must be consultation consistent with free, prior and informed consent before a project can be designated in Canada's national interest, and none have been so far. But even once one is designated, even once that happens, there must be additional consultations on the conditions necessary for that project to succeed. And these conditions, these issues would naturally include requirements for Indigenous ownership, Indigenous economic benefits, and environmental protections. Now let me illustrate that by giving a quick example of a strategy that Major Projects Office is currently evaluating. It's called the Northwest Critical Conservation Corridor. The corridor is in an area of northwest British Columbia that sits atop vast deposits of critical minerals and has the potential to connect the clean electricity grid of BC to the power grids of Yukon and Alberta while creating a new conservation area the size of Greece. The proposed North Coast transmission line at the heart of this project has the potential to create $10 billion in new economic activity, while reducing emissions by up to 3 million tonnes annually. It would also enable the expansion of the Red Chris mine to be built in close, direct collaboration with the Tahltan Nation. That mine will increase Canada's annual copper production by over 15% and employ 1,500 workers during operations and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by over 70%. The North Coast transmission line would also enable the Silissums LNG, owned by the Niska Nation, which will become Canada's second largest and one of the world's lowest emission LNG operations. In the coming months, through consultations with First Nations and on the advice of the Major Projects Office, we'll determine whether to formally designate these projects as being in the national interest, and if so, following further consultations, set the relevant conditions for these projects to proceed. Les projets comme celui-ci créeront des milliers de carrières bien rémunérées et apporteront une sécurité, une certitude et une prospérité durable aux communautés des Premières Nations. Être un partenaire fiable pour les Premières Nations va au-delà du simple respect de l'obligation de consultation. Cela implique également la création de richesses à long terme pour les Premières Nations grâce à une participation équitable et intégrale. Ces projets ont le potentiel d'agir comme une source de revenus autonome et fiable pour les communautés, une source de la richesse nécessaire pour la réalisation de vos priorités. To empower First Nations to own and lead major projects, our government has doubled the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program to $10 billion. Nous avons prévu 40 millions de dollars pour la participation et le renforcement des capacités des Premières Nations. Il s'agit d'un financement direct destiné à vos communautés afin que vous contribuerez à déterminer ce que nous pouvons bâtir ensemble. Now, as we build our nations, we must build strong communities. Over $16 billion has been invested thus far in over 13,000 projects that support Indigenous community infrastructure. Infrastructure that's central to the strength of those communities. Many aspects of this, I would like to focus today on two areas: housing and water. We've just created a new agency, Build Canada Homes, which will partner with First Nations and other orders of government to supercharge housing construction, using new factory technologies that cut building times by 50%, reduce costs by 20%, and lower emissions by 20%. Build Canada Homes will directly engage with First Nations to build affordable housing with a focus on Indigenous-led solutions, financial support, and those innovative construction methods. It's our vision that Build Canada Homes will incorporate Indigenous housing providers' knowledge and their leadership in these housing projects. Par ailleurs, j'ai demandé à la ministre des Services autochtones de collaborer avec vous au cours de la prochaine année afin de trouver une meilleure façon de répondre à vos besoins en matière de logement, notamment dans les réserves. Il faut, entre autres, veiller à ce que le programme de logement de la SCHL, au titre de l'article 95, se fonde sur les données de dernier recensement afin de répondre efficacement aux besoins des communautés. We want to build housing where First Nation families live. And to support the around two-thirds of First Nations peoples that live off reserve, we have committed $2.8 billion in Budget 2025 for off-reserve, urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing. And we confirm $1.7 billion to build on-reserve housing. Le gouvernement collaborera avec les dirigeants réunis ici afin d'élaborer des solutions abordables pour répondre aux besoins non satisfaits en matière de logement des Premières Nations. Building the homes we all need is one of the core missions of our government. That's why we're making a generational investment overall of $13 billion in housing through Build Canada Homes. And this is on top of the funding, $5 billion since 2016, invested directly in on-reserve housing. We're also moving forward with the essential work of building infrastructure on reserve, beginning with recognizing, as we all do, that clean water is foundational. Over the last decade, 85% of drinking water advisories on reserve have been lifted through investments of over $7 billion since 2016. Our government is committed to ending the remaining 38 advisories, and we've allocated in this budget an additional $2.3 billion for that purpose. Now, we recognize that we need a more permanent solution through a coordinated approach supported by the right funding mechanism and working with the provinces and territories at the table. This is a top priority for our government. And I'm pleased, the National Chief and I have discussed this, I'm pleased to announce that I will host early in the new year a joint federal, provincial, territorial First Ministers meeting with First Nations. And you will set the agenda. I'm sure that coordination and solutions on water will be one of the main items. I also can confirm that under the leadership of the Minister of Indigenous Services, this government intends to introduce water legislation in the spring of 2026. We will complete the crucial work as well, led by the Minister of Indigenous Services, to reform child and family services. This will help ensure the First Nations children grow up safe, secure, deeply connected to their families, their culture, their language. Our approach to child welfare will be First Nations-led, community-led, and it will be supported by significant additional funding. Now let me move towards a conclusion. That's a euphemism. I'm not quite ready to conclude, but I'm moving towards. Because I want to say a few words about a fundamental issue in relationships, which is trust. Because building together, you can only build together with trust. And I recognize that trust is never a given. It can only be earned, and it's earned through sustained action over time. Trust grows through partnership. Il faut donc collaborer de manière continue, dès le début et de façon transparente avec les dirigeants des Premières Nations à mesure que nous bâtissons des infrastructures d'envergure visant à transformer nos économies. Trust is built by openness. I will always be straight about the challenges we face and the choices we must take together. And while our government has just undertaken a rigorous spending review in advance of the budget, we protected the essential programs of Indigenous Services Canada and the work of Crown Indigenous Relations. Core services, such as health care, community safety, child and family services, education, and mental wellness, all of these will continue to progress. This builds on the over 400% increase in investments in Indigenous communities over the past decade. It also means that we recognize, that while outcomes have in many cases improved, there has not been as much progress as any of us would want, and certainly not enough progress, especially for the children who deserve it the most. So we will work together to better focus, appropriately scale and optimize these investments to maximize their impact. And that should mean more First Nations-led solutions, greater funding directly to rights holders with better measurement of outcomes. And finally, trust requires listening, even when the truth is difficult to hear. Canada's new government is moving forward on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls for action. We are advancing the calls for justice from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Nous mettons en œuvre la loi relative à la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones en partenariat avec les peuples autochtones. Now, I just want to close with an image, one illustration of how central I see us making reconciliation to our government's mandate. One of the first things I did when I came into office was to borrow a painting in the National Gallery by a First Nations artist, and it's installed just outside the Cabinet Room in Parliament. It's called A Brief History of Northwest Coast Design by Luke Parnell, and it depicts a part of our history through 11 wooden panels with images inspired by the designs on bentwood boxes and feast bowls. The first few of these panels burst with vibrant colors. And then, with colonial contact, those colors fade, till the middle ones become smothered in white paint, a culture literally whitewashed. The final panels resemble the original glory, with images that, although marked by what has been endured, are renewed and resurgent. This painting, to me, captures both the pain of suppression and the possibility of reconciliation. Cette possibilité repose sur la vérité. La vérité est le fondement de la justice. La réconciliation est une tâche qui doit être vécue et pratiquée à chaque jour. This painting is the last image that my ministers and I see before we enter the Cabinet Room to make some of the most important decisions for our country's future. And it's the first image we see when we leave, charged with the responsibility of implementing those decisions to create a better future. It's a reminder to us of the progress that's been made, the work that remains to achieve all that we can imagine and build together. Thank you very much for your attention. Merci beaucoup, and I look forward to your questions.
Lalan, Prime Minister Carney. Again, we do have time for some questions, and I want to recognize once more the collaboration and the openness to having one representative by region to be able to address Prime Minister with your region's concerns. I will start at microphone number 1 and remind you that we will be giving 2 minutes, especially for this section of the agenda, and I will be quite firm on time. If you do choose to separate your time amongst multiple speakers, that still means it's going to be 2 minutes. So I would look at microphone number 1. If you can tell us your region.
Bonjour. My name is Gary Quizis. I'm from Niskandaga First Nation, a remote community of Ontario. I just want to address a concern that we have for 30 years, 1,263 days of boil water advisory, and hearing you comments that you've been lifting boil water advisories in Canada, but I don't know which part of country you're talking about. That's water is being lifted, but our community hasn't been lifted for 30 years, and it's already intergenerational. It's been a full impact. I got a cap that says every child matters. You know, it's very disappointing to see a treaty partner that can't resolve their own capital asset from the government. So it's not our fault why we have boil water advisory. It's the capital assets from the federal government that puts us on the spot for 30 years. It's very sad to say. You know, people here to hear that 30 years of boil water advisory. We're the longest in Canada. We've been having commitments, but no action. And Prime Minister, I hear you presenting a lot of commitments, money you're putting. Is that going to be action to the First Nations? I want my community to be fast-tracked with all the capital assets in my community. before any development comes to our area.
Thank you, Chief.
You know, it's
Chief, your time is up. I'm sorry. We will have to move to our next speaker. And again, we will be taking 3 questions as was mentioned. So I would look towards microphone number 2, I believe our Quebec rep, Chief Lisa Robinson.
Quay, and I will be sharing my time with Grand Chief Cody Diabo from Kahnawake. Quay, Prime Minister Carney, chiefs, elders, and all the leaders. Today I'm here to speak as the Chief of Wolf Lake, a nation that is recognized by Canada, but treated as though we do not exist on our own land. This contradiction was created by Canada and is in Canada's complete power to fix. Prime Minister, in your fall budget, you made strong commitments, cutting red tape, restoring institutional justice, credibility, accelerating land-related processes, and reducing federal liability. Wolf Lake is the textbook example of where federal red tape has caused institutional failure. Canada is able to streamline processes for huge multi-million dollar, billion-dollar projects, some of the most complex processes in this country. Yet, reserve creation for a single nation is stuck in 1980s era bureaucracy. Canada's delays continue to punish Wolf Lake, while federal fiscal, legal, and moral risk continue to grow. You have spoken about rebuilding institutional trust, but if Canada cannot complete the land base of a First Nation that it already recognizes, what does that say about the integrity of the system?
Final 20 seconds, Chief Robinson.
20 seconds, oh my goodness. So our ask is simple, that your office directs departments to elevate, prioritize, and resolve the land issue for the people of Wolf Lake, and to ensure that equitable funding is made for us, that we are not punished further by Canada's delays. Prime Minister, if Canada can cut red tape for multi-billion-dollar projects, it can cut the process and the red tape for a First Nation that has waited long enough. Miigwech.
Thank you, Chief Robinson. I will now move to microphone 1. I see we have Regional Chief Cameron for the Saskatchewan region.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Bobby Cameron. I come from the Treaty 6 territory, Witchkin Lake First Nation. Just going to get right into it. Prime Minister Carney, in 1930, the government of the day transferred natural resources to the provincial governments. This led to tens of billions of dollars being lost for First Nations. Tens of billions of dollars. The solution is right there with Bill C-5. When we talk about inclusion, when we talk about honoring and respecting and implementing inherent and treaty rights holders. Prime Minister Carney, we invite you to our regions to come and listen and learn from our knowledge keepers, to our chiefs, our youth councils, our women councils, our two-spirit councils. We have our FSI Chiefs Assembly March 18th, 19th. We invite you. As First Nation people here in this room and right across Canada, we're kind people, we're humble people. We just want the best life for our little ones, like anybody else. We want to say, lastly, the NRTA has to be revised, the Bill C-5, full inclusion. Earlier you said, thank you for including us in the meeting. We can't wait for the day when we say thank you for including all First Nations with resource development, where we can build housing, infrastructure, detox and wellness centers. The list goes on as a few examples. It's an honor to say a few words. It's an honor to have you here, Prime Minister Carney. We acknowledge you, we respect you. Vice Chief Smythe Tasani is up there. He'll hand deliver a couple of good letters for you to read. At this time, Chief Kelvin Sanderson.
Prime Minister, short and sweet, only a few seconds. I hand-delivered a document for you there, if you don't mind. I was going to try and hand-deliver it to you when you said trust. Let's start building that trust. If I may get that young lady to hand-deliver it to you, I would prefer you to read it And I know it's about nation building too and economic development on our housing situations back at home. Thank you for your time. Eko Sid Nasko, now all the way from Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Saskatchewan. We have next on our list Chief Tamara from Nova Scotia, I believe, who's at microphone number 2. I'm sorry, Chief Diabo. Chief Tamara?
He gets 20 minutes, but we get 2.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Prime Minister, the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia are advancing child well-being jurisdiction, implementing our rights recognition tables, and preparing for major economic shifts such as offshore wind, moderate livelihood, and the transfer of federal lands. What continues to hold us back are the same structural barriers, such as federal funding frameworks built on provincial standards, siloed federal decision-making that slows nation-to-nation progress, and critically, provincial government that does not work with ILNU governments as equal partners in areas that directly affect our rights and our children. We are also still without a true revenue model that reflects our treaty right in this territory. Within this mandate, what specific structural change will your government commit to, whether it's a distinctions-based fiscal agreement for Mi'kmaq jurisdiction, a rights recognition secretariat with real decision-making authority, or a treaty-grounded revenue share model to ensure ILNU nations in Nova Scotia can govern with the full authority of our treaty rights, which are already affirmed? Sorry, that's it. I'm done.
Thank you, microphone number 2. Prime Minister, if you.
First off, thank you for the interventions. Thank you for the letters, and obviously send others in, and we'll respond. You know, I listened to Chief Gary from the Nisga'a in Ontario, who is one of the 38 jurisdictions, and has been for 30 years, where boiled water advisories have not been lifted, not one of the 149 where they have been lifted. And that's a failure, to be absolutely clear. You know it's a failure. You've lived through it most of your adult life. It's a failure of execution, and this is one of the things that this government is very focused on, is setting objectives, being clear about the objectives, determining why things have not worked as well as they should, given the investments that have been made, at least in terms of overall amounts of money. And given justice, all of these should have been lifted, but they haven't. So we have to change how we're delivering. We have to change the partnership, which is true in water. It is true in community policing as well. It is true in something as simple. I say it's simple, but it's not delivered. I see you, Chief Lisa Robinson, in the paperwork, the recognition of something as fundamental as the land base. I will follow up directly on this issue, and it's caught in another intervention, which is the federal government working in silos when we should be working together as one, and where we can't work effectively, and even in cases where we can work effectively, that there is the transfer of responsibility to the communities and to First Nations leadership. So if I would to give an overall approach, there's very specific issues that have been raised which need to be followed up and run down. But as an overall point, we are in the process, led by Minister Golmasti, but myself, others in Cabinet, of reviewing how and why we're not as effective as we should be, how we can use key aspects, priorities, water as one example, housing, policing, how we can use that federal-provincial table I mentioned a few moments ago to advance all of this and to move to a model that works just much better, and to hold ourselves to account for the progress or lack thereof. So it's, I would say one other thing, just in terms of the NRTA and the ability on Natural Resource Transfer Act, we are somewhat, well, ultimately we are totally guided by the courts and the court's decisions here. We have the ability, and we will move with this, we have the ability to ensure that the revenue sharing mechanisms from the provinces are much more equitable as we move forward. Last point I'm just going to make, just to loop back to Chief Robinson's powerful point, which is, yes, if we can be more efficient on big things, we should be even more efficient on small things. And there is a Department of Government Transformation. We've reformed one of our core departments. Minister Lightbound is in charge of that. And that's exactly what his mandate is to do across all delivery models. The ones that matter here are the ones that directly affect you. And that does require some pretty radical changes in how government works, which will take a few years, but they will bear fruit, and this will be the true test, because our relationships are the broadest relationships that we have as the federal government with any group of people who live in Canada. Sorry, thanks.
Prime Minister. And again, with the time, I just want to say we probably won't be able to get to everyone who are at the microphones. We're going to try to have some representativity from around the Third Island. So I'd look towards our next speaker at microphone number 1, Chief Munoz.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I'm going to ask him for the acknowledgement of the land, but we also would like to have acknowledgement of our sovereignty and our governance as well as our treaty. Canada's relationship with our nation is founded on sacred treaties. These are not historical artifacts. They are living, binding agreements between sovereign nations. When I first met you as Prime Minister, I presented you with a treaty medallion to remind you of the sacred covenant and Canada's ongoing responsibilities to our people. The Manitoba Chiefs maintain that the standards of consultation, accommodation, and consent affirmed in Canadian law and international remain fully in force. Regardless of the federal government's plan to fast-track so-called projects of national interest, treaty rights cannot be suspended for convenience or economic expediency. Why is Manitoba sovereign nations who are the rights holders excluded from the National Advisory Committee? Under the Indian Act, the second generation cutoff strips status Indians benefits and treaty entitlements from many of our descendants through no fault of their own. This is a colonial policy that continues to fracture families and erode our nations. How will your government ensure that the consultation and accommodation, consent, and the benefits arising from our treaties apply not only to these recognized rights holders, but also those unfairly excluded by the Indian Act, that the inherent and treaty rights of all our future generations are protected? Let me be clear. Consultation and accommodation do not constitute consent. Our nations in Manitoba retain their internal right to free, prior, informed consent. Anything about us without us will not work. Our traditional territories must be respected as priority jurisdictions. They cannot be and must not be treated as secondary to the interests of non-First Nation governments, such as provinces, corporations, or entities. The honour of the Crown demands no less. Mr. Prime Minister, I look forward to your response. Thank you very much for listening to me. Can I ask you?
I would look towards our Yukon rep, Chief Barb Joe, to ensure that we do have a question from our northern territories. If I can have microphone number 2 open for Chief Barb Joe.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister, elders, and AFN delegates. Chief Barb Joe from Champagne-Ajac First Nations in the Yukon. And I've been asked by the Yukon Caucus to ask the question to you today. Will you direct your government to take a whole-of-government approach to implement our modern treaties while still respecting our 3 unceded and unsigned First Nations, to ensure we address our fiscal relationships as governments and that our First Nation governments are directly engaged in priority setting on federal initiatives. Buenos Cheese.
We'll be heading to our next region. Regional Chief TJ, I believe you're speaking for the BC area. So if I can have microphone number 1 opened.
First of all, acknowledge the territory, the unceded and unsurrendered, continue occupied territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Must see, thank you for allowing us to be here. Mr. Carney, I'm here on behalf of Heiltsuk First Nation, Chief Marilyn Slett, who is also the president of Coastal First Nations. Mr. Carney, our title is not a policy issue. The Assembly of First Nations in Assembly here this morning voted unanimously to affirm the North Coast Declaration and rejection of any proposed pipeline to BC's coast today. Thank you. Do you respect the direction of the rights and title holders? And what concrete measures will your government implement to ensure that First Nations have true decision-making authority as stated in the United Nations Declaration Act, including free, prior, and informed consent on all major projects that impact our lands, waters, and rights? And will you commit today to meeting with the BC chiefs as soon as possible to discuss our priorities, including but not limited to addressing the inadequate and diminishing specific claims research funding, withdraw of Canada's judicial review on the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal Order 80, and negotiate long-term reform that meets the needs of all First Nations children and families in British Columbia, which ending Indigenous-specific racism and having all Canadians, in particular our Crown political representatives, accountable to the highest standards to help end racism against our Indigenous children and people. And in regards to mitigating Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is currently trespassing several First Nations reserves, territories, and waters in British Columbia. Thank you for your time. Must see.
Thank you, Regional Chief. So again, Prime Minister Carney, maybe for response to those questions and I think closing comments.
Thank you very much, Cedric. Thank you again for those questions and interventions. Let me make a distinction with respect to the first question on quote fast-tracking approvals. There are things for which the federal government has responsibility around, for example, environmental approvals if something's related to an interprovincial, for example, I gave the reference of the Northwest Critical Conservation Corridor, interties between the system, the clean grid of BC and Yukon and Alberta. Federal government legally has the responsibility to make those approvals. That is part of them, and those are speed with which we make those approvals and the coordination with which we make those approvals is something that we can help determine. In other words, if we ask for a bunch of information, do we ask for it by 5 different departments? That's what happens now. And the departments go one after the other, after the other, after the other, and next thing you know, the project, our side of the project approval takes 10 years. That is distinct from the process of free, prior, and informed consent. That is distinct. That's just one part of what's necessary in order for a project to happen. I use this phrase, necessary but not sufficient. It's important. It means something is necessary, but it doesn't decide what actually happens because everything has to be lined up in order for things to move forward. And that goes to the point I made earlier, and I'd like to stress, the question is, what are we for? What do we want to do together? There are certain projects that are First Nations led, which creates obviously tremendous opportunity for things to get done. It doesn't decide it in and of itself. It has to have environmental assessments, other elements. But what do we want to do together and how do we move forward on that? On the question from Yukon and the whole of government approach, I mean, the answer is yes in terms of that approach. And then in terms of, on behalf of the Chief, if I understood correctly, you, speaking coastal First Nations, the process of having that meeting has already begun. The request has already been made by my office, so I look forward to that meeting at the earliest opportunity. And there are and I absolutely recognize and respect that there are a broad range of issues to be discussed. I'll say one last thing, if I may, about the MOU with Alberta, between the federal government and Alberta. It is about a large number of things that are with respect to Alberta. What they are going to do with nuclear power, if anything, what they're going to do with artificial intelligence, what they are going to do with their pricing system, what they're going to do with carbon capture, an environmental way to make conventional energy more environmental. So there's a huge element there in the relationship, which is between the federal government and Alberta. If any of those issues, and many of them do, touch Treaty 6, 7, 8 rights holders, other rights holders in Alberta, of course, that consultation has to happen. And then there's the fundamental point very effectively made, and I hear that point. So yes, I look forward to the opportunity to meet with the leadership of the Coastal First Nations and as many others as I can. And I guess if you're giving me the final word, is that correct? Or? Absolutely. Yeah. I'll just reemphasize how much I appreciate the invitation, the spirit of the invitation, how much I recognize and my government recognizes how much work there is ahead, how much we recognize how much more effective we have to be in delivery to the people we serve, ultimately you serve, and how we have to move to a greater, even greater partnership model, First Nations-led, community-led. Minister Galmasti will be speaking to that, I believe, on Thursday, if my schedule is correct. There's 7 other ministers who will be here over the course of the next few days, a number who will be at your reception this evening as well. Thank you, and thank you very much, Senator.
I understand that many people feel like, I know that the AFN had spoken about, for those who had prepared questions, we were going to be able to have them compiled. And I know that many regions couldn't speak, but these are the rules and these are the things with the times that we had. I understand. And again, I believe this shows the importance to our Prime Minister. Chief Jacko. And again, I think this highlights the need maybe for a longer presence next time. Chief Jacko, please. Chief Jacko, please. We understand. So again,